Hey guys, thank you for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about getting into FPV and like the most cost-effective way to do it where you're going to spend the least amount of money overall. And if you decide that you don't want to do FPV for some reason, then you're going to be able to sell the things that you bought because you didn't buy the cheapest possible thing you could find, and you didn't rebuy multiple things because you bought something that you probably shouldn't have in the beginning because you were excited. So I am not going to say that I am not guilty of essentially going out and just buying things. I do it all the time, especially when I get into something new. I get excited and I want to buy something, but I try to do as much research as I possibly can before I go ahead and do that, especially when it's a hobby that is going to cost a lot of money. FPV in general, I'm just going to tell you right now, you're probably going to spend around $1,000 all up. You can spend more, you can spend less, but I think $1,000 is kind of the sweet spot as far as like everything you would need, from batteries, goggles, drone itself, and all the accessories that you're probably going to buy. Obviously, you buy something a little bit smaller, like something like this, you're not really going to be looking at that much money. But when you talk about a professional style, like 5-inch aircraft that you've probably seen online, and what got you excited and ultimately led you to finding this video, then you're probably going to spend about $1,000. So just go ahead and keep that in mind. But first of all, I want to talk about the bare bones basics of getting into FPV and the path that I would take. I've made a video like this in the past about 2 years ago, so it's a little outdated now. Some of the gear has changed, so we're going to go over the updated gear. I still recommend buying the controller first and then getting on a simulator and using that simulator as a tool for getting better and understanding how the controls work, and then how to manipulate the quad so that when you do get a real quad, it makes life a lot easier and you don't crash as much, and ultimately save yourself a lot of money. So but without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about controllers. So that is the first thing they're going to need. We'll need goggles, and we'll need a drone, and we'll need batteries and accessories at a later point. But the first thing that we're going to need is a controller, or a radio. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to. So I have a radio. I'll just talk about my radio and kind of talk about why I'm not recommending that one, because specifically it's going to cost a lot more money, and it's ultimately just a bunch of add-ons and modifications to get something where I want it, and it just took a lot of additions and stuff to get there. So this is the radio that we're talking about. These things, they have a lot of switches. You don't need to be super scared of all the switches. You're really only going to use maybe 1 or 2 switches at most, and then these 2 gimbals here. So you have 2 different ranges of motion on each gimbal. So you have throttle, usually on your left, up and down. You have yaw, which is side to side on the left stick, side to side. You have roll, which is like this on the drone. And then you have pitch, up and down, which is like this on the drone. So pitch and roll are coupled on this right gimbal, and then yaw and throttle are coupled on this left gimbal. Now, there are different settings depending on where you live in the world, but for this particular video, we're going to talk about mode 2, which is throttle and yaw coupled on the left gimbal, and roll and pitch on the right gimbal. They can be switched up depending on where you live. Some places mode 1 is popular, where throttle is on the right, and just for now, mode 2 is what you need to know. So this is the radio that I've been using for the last 6 years. This isn't the exact radio because this is the radio I use now, but I've changed a couple times because either I've broken something, or I've wanted to get a different thing, or I've modified it in some way, shape, or form. But I'll just give you a quick rundown. So this is a Taranis. This is made by a company called FrSky. They made a really great product for a long time. It's based off of an old JR radio model, so the form is copied. So the shape of this thing and the ergonomics of it are copied from a company called JR that made a radio back in the 90s called the 9303. And then essentially they took a really well-designed radio and then put their own electronics in it, kind of made it open source, and that's why I liked it. Well, now they're closing that source down and making it a little bit more hard to do the things that most people want to do in this hobby, which is keep things open source and be able to use the things that they want to use and programs the things that they want to be programmed into these things. So with that being said, FrSky, I wouldn't recommend buying a radio from them, because ultimately you're going to want to have Crossfire, which is this radio link. This is what this giant antenna on here. I'm not using the stock radio link in this antenna, in this radio, sorry. So without confusing you too much, you have the radio, and then usually they control a 2.4 gigahertz radio signal that goes to the drone. So it's a 2.4. It's basically the same thing that Wi-Fi is, okay? Now, on this particular radio, I'm running on 900 megahertz, which is a lower frequency, enables you to go a lot farther, has a more robust link, so you're not going to worry about, oh, if I go behind that building, am I going to lose control of my aircraft? So this is the standard in the industry. There are many other links out there on different frequencies, and then every single radio has their own ecosystem that they're going to lock you into with their receivers, because that's where they make the money. They sell the radios for cheap, but then they expect you to buy a receiver for each of your drones. You do need a specific receiver for whatever radio you have for the drone. So why am I telling you all of this? Because we're talking about radios and simulators today. Well, you need to make a good purchase with your radio so that when you do get off of the simulator and go to making your real drone fly, you need to have a nice ecosystem, or at least understand that, oh, I bought this cheap thing and I'm locked into this ecosystem and I'll make it work, or maybe I made a mistake, I should probably sell this. So I'm trying to keep you from making the mistake and just go ahead and get something that's got Crossfire, because that is the industry standard. And most people are going to use it if you're using this as a legitimate hobby all the time, every day. The latency is the lowest, the link is the most robust, and most of the people, if not all professionals in this hobby, are using Crossfire. That doesn't necessarily say that you have to use Crossfire. I'm just letting you know the one option that we'll talk about here in a second has it built in, and it's $200. So anyways, this alone, this standalone unit, the Crossfire unit, $200. The radio, just the radio itself, $260. Then you got this thing, which is, another $40. You got the battery, which is another $30. This thing is adding up to be about $500 in radio, okay? And it's all just me adding stuff onto it to make it what I want. Yes, I'm comfortable with it. I like it. I fly a certain way. I fly with my thumbs and my index finger. Like, this is called pinch flying. A lot of people fly with their thumbs, and I'll talk about why that's important later when we talk about this other radio, or the other radio. But yeah, I'm comfortable with this. It feels really good in my hands. I've always liked the 9303 design, and then when this company came out, which was essentially a copy of it, it was like heaven for me. So this is what I use. I don't recommend buying that because it's very expensive, and I don't think a lot of people I'll eventually switch away from that because I just don't like where it's going. Next, you can buy a radio like this, which is something a little bit newer. It's got a color touch screen. It's called the TS16S. It's made by a company called Radio Master. This is about $150. You got to buy a battery. That's another $20. It's a very good radio, extremely open source, has multi-protocol. If you want to use 2.4 gigahertz, you can use pretty much, not all, but a lot of receivers. You'll just have to look into that online as far as what you can use and can't use, because you are locked into a 2.4 if you use the internal transmitter. But you can also pull this back piece off right here. If I don't have any fingernails, so okay, I got it off. You can plug in a Crossfire unit there, but then you're talking about another $100 to $200 on top of the $160 plus the battery that you got. So it just gets out of control really quick when you're talking about adding things on. You could buy that right now for $160, have a great radio, plug into the computer, and be fine. But I promise you, when you go to buy a real quad and you want to run a Crossfire, because that's just a standard. I do work with TBS, but I'm just letting you know, if you go onto a Facebook group, which is probably where you're going to get the most information these days, people are going to say Crossfire is where it's at. It's got wireless Bluetooth interconnection between the receiver and the unit. They're just take my word for it. The last radio, and the one that we're probably, I'm going to recommend it because it's $200. I think it's like $220 if you get the Pro model that's got the folding gimbals. Look at this thing. Ergonomically, it's very similar to something that you've probably already used, like an Xbox or a PlayStation remote. At the same time, it's got Crossfire built in. It's black. What more could you want as far as a color scheme? You're not going to clash with anything that you have. The quality of it is extremely nice. There's not as many switches to get broken. The antenna folds up and folds away. Again, like I said, it's got Crossfire built in, so your 900 megahertz out of the box, your low latency out of the box. You have Hall effect gimbals, which is another thing that you're going to have to pay extra for. So a Hall effect sensor is a magnetic sensor versus a potentiometer, which is like basically a brush that's brushing on the inside of this thing. It's a variable resistor. You want potentiometer gimbals because they're just going to be more precise and higher quality. Again, this is the thing that I would recommend just because of the form factor. It's going to be something you're more familiar with, coming from most people that are getting an FPV have at least played on an Xbox before, and they're not going to be used to this giant box, where this is something that's going to be a lot nicer. Now, earlier when I stated that I fly with my I pinch like this, So the reason I don't use this radio personally, I think it's a little small because I've been flying for that giant box for 6 years. When you go to something like that to this, it's just, I could get used to it, but I'm so used to that. Why change what I've been using? I don't want to relearn. This thing doesn't add anything other than form factor for me personally. Like, I don't mind having that big box because I'm used to it, and if it makes me fly better, then I'm just going to stick with what I have. But for people getting into it, if you learn on something like this, then that's just going to be what you're used to, and there's no downside for you. So again, form factor is the only reason why I don't use this thing, because I pinch also. If I flew thumbs, it's perfect. But since I pinch, it makes it a little awkward, especially considering I rested on my stomach like this. So when I recommend something that I don't use, why are you recommending that? Well, that's why. Because I can't use it, because I don't want to have to relearn how to fly just because a smaller radio or something like that. So again, this is what I'm going to recommend. It charges via USB-C. It's got its own built-in battery. You don't have to buy a battery separately. Everything folds down, like I said. It's got Crossfire built in. There's really no other reason to buy a radio these days other than this one. And I'm not the only person that's saying that, but hey, I'm not here to boast TBS up. I'm literally here just telling you why this radio is so good. Next, since we've picked the radio, TBS Tango 2, I don't even know if I said that, we're going to go into the fact that we need to get into a simulator. So with a simulator, what simulator are we going to use, and why wouldn't we use other ones? So first of all, there are a lot of simulators out there. There's one from DRL, Drone Racing League. You might have seen that on ESPN. There's DCL, which is like the European version of that, Drone Champions League. They have a simulator. Then there's one called Liftoff, which is actually on Steam, which is very much a good game/simulator. And then there's another one called Velocidrone. There are other ones out there, but these are the 4 that we're going to talk about. So I'll just go ahead and say right now that the 3 I mentioned in the beginning, the DCL, DRL, and the Liftoff game, are games. When I say game behind them, it's very much a game. It's going to give you an understanding of what the controls are doing, but at the same time, you're not going to get the same feedback that you would out of a real quad, because there's just, I call it like moon gravity. All these games have like epic moon gravity, and you go punch up and the quad just kind of floats there forever, and that's not how it is in real life. So you want the physics to be as real as possible, so that when you go to fly, you're not only familiar with how the sticks move and what they do and how they interact with the quad itself, but also how the physics are, how gravity is going to react with the aircraft, because it does happen a lot faster than you probably want it to, especially in the beginning when you're crashing a lot. So again, this is the radio we have. The game of choice, I haven't changed much since 2017 when I made my last video, because I thought Velocidrone was the best then, and I still think it's the best, especially considering there's a really cool feature in it that I'll talk about here in a second that makes it a tool that even I think pros can use. And I was actually told about this the other day by a buddy of mine named Michael from Beverly Hills Aerials. So thanks, Michael, for letting me know that this was available, because I didn't even know that it was. So let's go ahead and dive onto the computer, and we'll download this program. I'll show you how easy it is to get going, because it really is easy. So we're going to go to Google, and we're literally going to just type in Velocidrone. So it's Velocidrone, and we're going to go to the website, and I do have fast internet. Let's see. Click download. We'll go to here, and we're going to type in our email address. We're basically going to create we're going to register. And when we register, then you have the option to download the game. I think it's about 20 bucks. So all up with the radio and the game, you're looking at probably around 250 bucks maybe with shipping. Again, not much considering what we're getting into. So next, we're going to go, and we're actually going to open up the game, and we're going to set up the radio so that it works with the game. So before we do that, we need to turn the radio on and calibrate the sticks in the radio so that they know the maximum and minimum inputs, and then also we'll have to calibrate it in the game. I'm just going to go ahead and do that with you guys, because it's a pretty simple process. So to turn on the radio, we're literally just going to hold down this button down here on the bottom.
Welcome to Tango 2.
And then we're going to hit exit, 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 because it's probably going to give us some kind of error. Because one of the sticks is moved, or a switch is in a weird position or something like that. We're going to hit menu. We're actually going to hold menu down, and then there will be 6 pages up in the top. You're going to hit page. You'll see 1 of 6. You're going to go all the way to 6 of 6. And when you get to 6 of 6, it says enter to start calibration, and it has left, both, and right. We want to do both, so we're going to scroll over to where both is highlighted. We're going to hit this button actually clicks in. So it says center the sticks, then it says hold the sticks to the right, hold the sticks up. All right, so once you're done calibrating, you're gonna move the sticks around, see that they match what's on the screen. You can hit exit, and then we're actually gonna open up the game. So let me do this. We're gonna open up the game here. So I've literally just downloaded it and then gone onto my desktop, opened up the game. We're gonna go to controller, and this is a USB-C. So for those of you that don't know what USB-C looks like, it looks like, I don't know if I can focus it. It looks like that. So USB-C. So that's what this radio uses, and that's what it charges with. It's actually here on the bottom right here. So we're going to open up the game, and when we open up the game, we're going to go to controller. Like I said before, we're going to plug in they're going to turn the radio on, we're going to open up the game, we're going to plug in the USB-C. When we do that, a little thing on the screen is going to come up. It says joystick, USB, agent, or storage. We want to click joystick. Okay, once we do that, we should hear our computer go doo-doo-doo-doo or whatever. Then you're going to click assign controller, and you're going to move a stick. So when we move a stick, we can see it actually moving on the screen, but there we go. Click assign controller, and now it says TBS joystick, and you can see the quad moving about over here, okay? Now, what we want to do is we want to assign sticks, okay? We click assign sticks, and we follow the diagram in and out. We don't have to be precise about timing or anything. You're just letting the thing know that we're calibrating it. So we're going to center the sticks. We're going to follow that one, follow that one, follow that one, follow that one, center them again. And once they're centered, we're going to move roll, which is the right one to the right one up, the left one to the side, and the left one up. And now we should be, like when we hold bottom left on both, bottom right, it should be matched up with how it is in the game, okay? So now that we've done that, we're going to back out, and we're going to go to single player, all right? And this is where you pick your drone. So there's plenty of drones in here. You can go up here, add a quad. You can scroll through and pick whatever you want if you want it to look a certain way. They all do fly slightly different. So with each drone, you're going to have different characteristics as far as how they fly because of how much they weigh or how the motors are oriented or what the frame is made of. Like a lot of stuff has been taken into consideration as far as the simulator is concerned to getting these drones to fly a little bit differently depending on the props they have and whatnot. You can all obviously adjust a lot of this in-game. The one that I like is called the Little Bastard. So if we go in there, it's this one right here. This Little Bastard. So this is my favorite one. I find it to be the one that I can get dialed in like my real quad. So I would hit select model even though I have it already selected. And then we go to select quad over here. And then we can pick what place we want to go fly. For this particular instance, I'm going to click this city that I've made. I've made a custom map because I want to show you a cool feature in this game that really sets it apart from the rest. So we're going to say select scenery. Once the scenery is up, what we're going to do is we're actually going to test and make sure the quad is doing what we need it to. So left stick up, throttle, left stick up slightly a little bit so that we can get some spinning of the props, and we're going to spin left, we're going to spin right, and that seems to be working correctly. We're going to pitch back and forth on the right stick, up and down, and see that that's working. We're going to roll here, and that's working. So now we're good. We can fly around, all right? So this is a free roam world. You can literally go and do whatever the heck you want to do. You know, you can fly through the city. You can do rolls. There's no stabilization on. Again, this is a lot different than like what most people are going to be doing with DJI with a stabilization drone, okay? So, yeah, there's a lot of things that I could tell you to do to practice, but in general, just getting familiar with how these controls work and then mixing them together to make the end goal result, you know, flying this thing smoothly and getting it to be positioned where you want it to be positioned is what you're going to be going for. So the one thing about this game that I think is a just end-all be-all thing for this game is the fact that you can put in moving objects. So as you can see right here, I didn't do a very good job, but I put in a car that is driving down the street. You can see the car is like a submarine and it's half underwater, but you can still see that there's a car. So this is really good for like pro guys or guys that are aspiring to use this as something for a career. and they want to be able to fly around an object and orbit around it, or frame it up while it's moving, because this is a very challenging thing to do as far as framing a moving thing, whether it's a vehicle or a person on a motorcycle or something like that. So one last thing I can talk about is setup. So I'll go over here and click Advanced Drone Setup, and we'll talk about this in a future video because this is a very in-depth conversation about tuning these aircraft to get it to fly a certain way. So when we're talking about aircraft in general on these games or just in real life, this is all flight controller based. So this thing is like essentially your settings in your flight controller. All of this is electronic. There's no physical thing other than the weight of the propeller and the pitch of the propeller and the motor speed and the weight of the aircraft. Those things do affect it, but as far as like how fast these things spin and roll, it's all controlled in here with your rates. And then how these things interact with the environment is controlled by these things, the PID, or proportional, integral, and derivative. So we'll talk about that later, but for now, if you just copy this on the little bastard, the quad should fly very docile and be a good setup for a beginner. Cool. So anyways, I hope that was very entertaining, and I hope you learned a lot. And I'll be doing videos in the future specifically about setup and the path that I would go down, because eventually you're going to want to buy something, and I think these quads are actually a lot better than they were a couple years ago as far as what I would recommend buying. Because back in the day, I would just be like, yeah, you buy like a brushless quad or a brushed quad, which is $100, $200 depending on where you go, and then at the end of the day, it doesn't really translate to how a 5-inch quad flies as much. Like, you can just do it on the simulator and get the same feeling, but flying in real life, you kind of understand how the video signal works. There's just a lot of in-depth stuff as far as what you need to understand to be confident in flying these things. But something like this is probably going to be what you want as far as your next step. So you got radio, you got your simulator, you're practicing, you're really only about $250 in, and then you got something like this, which is I think $160, something like that, and you get some batteries and a charger. So it starts accruing quickly as far as the money is concerned. But yeah, it's just an easier way to get into this stuff than just like full on buying it, unless you just want to do that, and that's not there's nothing wrong with that. But I think this is the way to practice to make sure that you're gonna have a good experience. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day. I'm sorry if I seem